From artificial intelligence to the great Facebook backlash to the iPhone X. 2017 was a year in technology defined by both disruption and by innovation. For Tech Republic and ZDNet, I'm Dan Patterson with Larry Dignan and Jason Heiner, and these are the 7 technology trends that defined 2017.
The year in Alexa. When we started out with CES, Alexa wasn't even at CES. And between all the devices that were embedding Alexa and all the kind of deals that were being cut, it kicked off basically Amazon's Alexa Everywhere strategy. And then from there, they basically carpet bombed your house with Echo devices of, look, there was a bunch of them. So that put Alexa out there more. And then they did Alexa for Business, which is rolling out, as we speak. So if you add it up, it's, if you're looking at it from the digital assistant wars, Alexa really went with this distribution sort of strategy. Alexa may not be the smartest assistant in the room, but because she's everywhere, she's only going to get smarter and smarter and smarter, just from the data inputs. So, for me, it's really the year of Alexa.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like when Twitter first came out and Twitter had this open API and anybody could do it. And so everybody built these apps and they built their, tweet deck and all these things. The developers really were the story for Twitter early on. And then they sort of, went back and tried to close it off and, and sort of destroyed their growth. But that's a whole nother story. But this is like the early part of Twitter. Alexa has that strategy where it looped in the developers, gave them a great API, gave them an easy on-ramp to start using it, to start building skills. And because of that, it's just lapped everybody, kind of surprisingly. And it did. It snuck up on everybody else, the rivals, Microsoft, Google, Apple, and others. And it even surprised people at Amazon, that we've talked to. They didn't expect it to go as nuts as it has. They're doing it right though, like you said, because they've sort of has this everywhere strategy. They have sort of 2 strategies. They have the OEM strategy in that you can build Alexa into your fridge or your whatever other device, your smart speaker and all of those kinds of things, your lamp like GE's doing. Or you can build if you're a developer, you can build your skills on top of it. And so it's pretty potent stuff.
So, Jason, this was the year that Facebook and a number of technology companies had a reckoning about how their relationship with consumers, with business, and with government kind of shifted. What happened with the technology backlash?
Yeah, you could argue that a lot of the 2016 elections in the US, as well as the Brexit vote in the UK, a lot of it was this general backlash against globalization. And a lot of that's led by the technology revolution, the technology world, technology industry. So you've got that. And then you have the fact that, Russian hackers exploited Facebook and some other platforms, but especially Facebook, to sow some kind of doubt and dissension and fake news and all of that, which became an even stronger indictment against the tech industry as well. And so there's some kind of sort of weird virtuous or, unvirtuous circle there, depending on your perspective. But then the sort of the highlight of that, or the nadir, you might say, was when the Senate hearings happened that dragged in Facebook, Google, and Twitter to Washington and sort of grilled them on how this could have happened. And so it's been a tough year for Zuckerberg and crew, Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook. But they've been throwing a lot of people at it, moderators, algorithms. As Larry wrote, the fact that they're having to hire so many people is a bit of an indictment against the state of the algorithms. And then, it's become its own thing, right? They're having to try to fix all the problems Facebook is and having to win back trust because of this. And that's a little bit of a metaphor for the whole tech industry as a whole, I think.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about Facebook, the other thing to talk about is, they had a lot of problems with their ad and marketer metrics, right? Where there were video plays that were being questioned. There were a bunch of things going on there. And they kind of had to backtrack on that a few times too. I think at the end of the day, what I think is happening with Facebook, generically, I think people are kind of on to the idea that, yeah, we're the product. And I think they're also on to the idea that Facebook is one hell of a psychology experiment, whether it's being gamed with fake news, the filter bubble, how they can target things. It goes on and on and on. So I think 2017 is kind of when the light bulb went on a little bit. And I think it puts Facebook in a different light. It's sort of like when you realize, wow, I'm wasting how much time on this property? And, you can see people starting to ask that question just a little bit. Now, it's not enough to like sink the company or anything, but in their New York holiday party, you could kind of see where they're a little touchy about some of these things, right? Like they had their things where, they had a panel about tech myths, and it was basically Facebook talking to Facebook. They're like talking to themselves. But one myth was like, virtual reality is not isolating. And they come up with all their social good and education, blah, blah, blah. And we all know that, our kids with virtual headsets on, with the virtual reality headsets, it's going to make the smartphone look like, a rock, right? It's just the addiction is just going to be totally a different animal. And everywhere you go, they're really emphasizing the good they do. And Facebook does do a lot of good. But it was almost like an overreaction to what's happened to them this year, where they've just taken a bunch of jabs. So, we'll see how this plays out over time. But I think whether it's Google, Facebook, there's a trust issue in tech for sure.
And, Larry, to that end, the best thing I did on Facebook this year was delete my Facebook account. And lo and behold, I have all of this time that I can spend being productive and less stressed out. Cybersecurity and hackers, nothing new, but the leaks are now coming from the inside. Larry, is this a new trend, or is this an explosion of a trend that was pre-existing?
It's a trend that was pre-existing, but whether it's ransomware, it all usually starts with an insider, right? It's either an employee that's just dumb or malicious or just negligent. Right. I mean, the common thread with all these, a lot of the data breaches of late are just Amazon S3 cloud storage buckets that are left unsecured. And you might as well just be, when you do that, you might as well just be holding out a sign and go, hey, take our stuff. It's like leaving the front door of your house open. It's, it's just absurd. But the inside, I think, as technology scales and the threats emerge and they get, fancier and fancier as we go on, it's just going to exploit stupid humans over and over again. And I don't quite know how you fix that one. And so my guess is 2018's breaches are going to look worse than 2017. What I do know is security has become a boardroom issue. So heads do roll when you screw up really big, cue the Equifax B-roll here. But I don't think the insider threat's going to go away. I think it's just going to be exploited more and more and more as you scale.
Yeah, two kind of observations on the security threat was, one is, like Larry's saying, it's a lot of these things that are behind the scenes that are the vulnerabilities. A lot of that, the other part of it, where a lot of the attacks come into play, is your partners. So sometimes you have these connections with your partners and you have this trust factor where you give them access to a lot of stuff. And a lot of times that's the way attackers can get in, because you may have everything locked down great, including Amazon S3, all the stuff. But if your partners don't, and a hacker can, navigate in, it's just like a free back door. And so getting that cleaned up is a big part of the solution, and having this whole like least privilege thing that goes on in a lot of companies in terms of like the CISOs who are trying to lock down a lot of this stuff and close some of these holes. And then you have the fact that, I don't know that we thought it could get any worse, and then Equifax happened. But a lot of this is due to old technology. A lot of these tech vendors, in the past, security was an afterthought, and they were all so focused on innovation, and they had to be to survive. But because of that, security was an afterthought. Now over the last few years, they've done a lot better job. The problem is all of that old technology is still out there, all that insecure stuff. So all these attacks, or most of them, are attacking old stuff that's been unsecured or poorly secured. And so we certainly haven't paid all that debt back yet. Like Larry was saying, 2018 is likely to be worse than 2017. 2019 possibly still is likely to be worse too, until we get a lot of that old technology off the decks, off our plate.
So speaking of legacy technology, 2017 was the year the iPhone turned 10. With the iPhone 10, millions of consumers around the world called it the iPhone X. Fresh design, incredible technology, including augmented reality on the inside. But Jason, the smartphone feels like yesterday's technology. What does the future of the smartphone look like?
Yeah, I mean, you have to give Apple and even probably more so companies like, Samsung and OnePlus with their 5T, who got to some of this stuff first with the, smaller bezels, and, Apple's trying to do the Face ID thing instead of fingerprint, which is having its growing pains for sure. Hard to recommend to most of average users, honestly. But you have to give them credit that all these vendors have tried to innovate a little more in 2017 than they have in past years, right? We had a lot of incrementalism for several years. Now you've got some new stuff happening. The best thing about the iPhone 10 is probably the fact that it was a larger screen and a smaller form factor. Although funny enough, I think a lot of people are like, look, I got used to a little bit bigger screen. I'd like to have that larger, iPhone 10 screen on a sort of a bigger form factor so I can get more screen like you get with the Samsung, Note 8. So some good stuff happening, certainly some steps forward. It'll be interesting to see if the Face ID, face recognition, other biometrics are going to take off. None of them have been as reliable or as, locked down as the fingerprint so far. And so, others are taking their lumps, whether it's iris scanning or facial recognition and those kinds of things. But you have to expect that that's going to improve. And so, it is yesterday's technology, but it's still, it's kind of like the PC has been for a long time, right? It's still the thing people do to do a lot of their work. The phone's going to still be the thing that a lot of people, the majority of the world, uses as their main computer for, a decade to come, at least. So the stuff that's happening is important, and it will make a difference in moving things forward in terms of both security and usability.
Yeah, I just think for a lot of people, if you want to see the future of the smartphone, you look at the PC, because I think that's essentially what the smartphone's become. As far as computing power goes, you toss in the cloud, you toss in some storage. I mean, yesterday I was out and about a bunch, and basically my Note 8 was a laptop. And there was really, you could hardly, I didn't write a 1,000-word story or anything, but generally speaking, I could get just as much done on the go. And I think that's how we're going to start looking at our smartphones over time. I think, you put your laptop in the backpack. I think the smartphone's going to have a similar sort of feel to it. And I don't know what that next thing is. It might be a smartwatch. It might be whatever. But I really think the smartphone is almost your de facto laptop. And I think it's almost treated as such now, right? So that's kind of the future of the smartphone is really the laptop to me.
And a lot of that computing power that makes the smartphone so compelling comes from the cloud. This was also the year Microsoft truly embraced the cloud, and Windows S hit desktops with a light version of Windows. Larry, is this the future of Windows?
It might be. I was interested in Windows 10S as a year in review topic, largely because it's that second run at Windows on ARM, right? So whether you look at the data center, you look at smartphones, that ARM architecture for processors really controls a ton, right? It's not quite caught on the data center, but I'm pretty confident we'll get there over time. Certainly smartphones, they're all ARM. And so what's interesting here is Microsoft is given another run at ARM because they used to have Windows RT in their Surface, and that kind of failed miserably. But the compelling part with the Windows 10s laptops are that they do have a 20-hour plus battery life. They can do things that your smartphone can do in terms of how they last on the go and all that. The catch is the only apps available on Windows 10s are the ones through the Windows App Store, right? So that's great for security. Not so great if you have a legacy app you want to run on Windows 10s and it doesn't work. Microsoft has an emulator here to run the older applications, potentially. If it's a corporate app, it may not run. So it's like an interesting turn. Yeah, Microsoft still made it as complicated as it makes most things. So I think, but it's a fascinating thing though, because I do think if you can take a laptop/tablet, run it on ARM, then maybe you have the best of both worlds with that smartphone meets laptop kind of thing, meets tablet. You might actually have that convergence device, finally. So you look at that, it's interesting to watch. I don't know if the average bear is going to, notice the difference between Windows 10 and Windows 10s. I'm not sure the average bear cares anymore. But it's just interesting, right? Because you see these lightweight laptop models now with the Chromebook, Windows 10s. They're all trying to get there and scale down. So we'll see how it goes. But I think that's an interesting development that'll easily carry over into 2018.
Yeah, this was definitely their Chromebook, answer, right? Chromebooks have been nibbling at the bottom of the PC market for the last few years. They needed a good answer, and this was it. I kind of wish there's just one thing I wish they would have done is I wish they would have taken Windows Mobile, which despite all of the sort of snickering we've done at it and others have too, was actually fairly decent as a operating system. Certainly better than the whole hog Windows. Like the problem with Windows 10s is it still has like weird driver issues. Just like you still have some of the dumb stuff that you have on Windows where like you plug in a mouse and then you have to like download a driver, just weird stuff like that. I wish they would have somehow maybe conquered that a little better, and maybe used the Windows Mobile and just called it Windows 10s because they're not, you're not doing sort of standard Windows apps anyway. And then if they could have done a deal with Google to let like the Google Play Store play on it, so that it sort of worked like a tablet, which is somewhat useful on the Chromebooks because there's just a few apps every once in a while that you're like, I just wish I could do that as an app. And then if you can grab the Google Play Store, it's not always pretty or polished, but it works and it's kind of more effective than maybe the web, especially when you're going offline or you have like a bad connection. So there's just a few things like that I think I wish they would have done better. And I think maybe they will over time if they continue to kind of slim down Windows so it has that kind of Chromebook, limited feel. The best thing about Chromebooks is that they're limited. And I think that they kind of did that in Windows 10s. And I think they should probably take it further.
Yeah, the biggest problem there is just reverse compatibility.
Yeah.
Microsoft has a lot of old stuff that's got to be compatible with. And it's hard to just cut that off.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, simplicity was full display with the emergence of the Raspberry Pi this year. Raspberry Pi has been around for a long time. It's a low-cost, open-source computing platform, but it really hit the mainstream this year and continues to see iterative updates that make the machine pretty simple but pretty powerful. Jason, is this the hobbyist's best friend, or is there more potential to the Raspberry Pi?
Oh yeah, there's lots more. The great thing about the Pi is it's another one of these things that they didn't expect it to be nearly as popular as it has been. It was a little bit of a science experiment, right, by some folks that are more like students and academics. And Nick Heath has the story of it better than anybody on both ZDNet and Tech Republic. So you can read all of that story. It's a great story. And then Nick's written a lot about it since, and he writes about the competitors to it as well. And it is one of those things that it's helping to democratize things a little bit because the Pi you can pick up if you're a startup, you don't have a whole lot of money, you don't have a huge team. you can take the Pi and you can use it almost kind of like 3D printing, right? To sort of build prototypes, to build sort of smallish products or small run products, and try it out, crowdfund. So it's been a great enabler, I think, for the sort of small folks that aren't funded by a ton of money and want to get out there and hack around and try some things. And it's been great for that crowd. And I think that, hobbyists in tech aren't sort of what they used to be. I think hobbyists have evolved into the sort of entrepreneur folks. A lot of people who used to be hobbyists, now their sort of patience with technology is a lot less. They just sort of want stuff to work and they don't want to have to integrate everything. But for those who do, the Raspberry Pi is just a lot of fun, and you see a lot of creativity being unleashed because this thing lets you be a hardware hacker, whereas it used to be just incredibly expensive to hack with hardware. You really needed multi-million-dollar funding, and you don't need that anymore. And so that's been the best thing with this. And if you want to see it, we see it. There's a lot of interest in it too. Every time we publish some stuff on Tech Republic and on ZDNet, it gets really good traffic. And so that tells us, how many people there are out there that are interested.
Yeah, I just like how it's tapped into so many different threads. Like it's tapped into that little open source hardware movement. It's tapped into the hobbyist. There's always some new application for it that looks really cool. It's not something I would do on the weekend, but you got to tip the cap to the people that play with that stuff because it's just cool.
And it's also a great cybersecurity tool for those who are extraordinarily concerned about how they connect to secure sites. Raspberry Pi is a low-cost, high-performance device that lets you discreetly log in and log out to sites that you may need to make sure that that device is isolated from the rest of your web or computing uses. So, Jason, finally, but last but not least, is the emergence of artificial intelligence and machine learning into mainstream business technology. Again, just like cybersecurity, there's nothing new about AI, but it's certainly having a new spring or a renaissance in its uses in business.
Yeah, I mean, Larry's written a lot about this. I've written a lot about it. We talk about it kind of all the time. The effect that it's going to have on jobs, of course, is probably the biggest macro trend in tech over the next decade and several decades. But just to sort of put it in perspective, one of the things that we like to do, of course, is be kind of skeptical, especially about the way the conversation is framed and the stories are told sometimes. So we have a little bit of that problem with AI this year. It's clearly the hottest, most talked about topic if you were to do the math. But it's also got the same problem that trends of the last few years, like cloud and big data, have, and that like now everything's AI. Even if it's not, there were a lot of things that were called cloud that were actually what we used to just call data centers. There were a lot of things that are called big data that we used to just call like reports. Same thing with AI. There's a lot of things we used to just call algorithms or coding or even math that are now, AI. I saw this when I was in Beijing and Paris. When you talk to VCs and startups and entrepreneurs, like half of all startups now are AI startups, whether they're making a grocery delivery startup or they're making like a selfie drone. It's all AI. So you have to kind of be careful with this, but it's because it's the best way to get funded. That's why the startups and entrepreneurs are talking about it that way. But just to put it in perspective, in our article, we talk about the fact that by 2020, the analysts estimate that there's going to be about $50 million invested in AI. That compares to $50 billion invested in AI by 2020. That compares to $200 billion in big data analytics and $1.3 trillion in IoT. So while you've got some really interesting and important stuff happening in AI, and some of that sort of seeps into a lot of these other areas, let's also keep it in perspective that it's not necessarily where businesses and IT departments are spending the most money, or at least in some ways that they are. They're just calling it what it is, algorithms or coding or math.
Yeah, well, the funny part about those three parts is ultimately for the average enterprise, they all blend together, right? So
true.
You're looking at AI, machine learning, big data, and IoT. They're almost the same thing at the end of the day. I think what 2017 meant for AI is that there are a lot of real projects going on. I expect some of them will pan out really well. Others won't. I think, but what it shows is that, it's a real technology, even though actually the mathematics behind it, nothing's really been done since 1956. Like
Nothing new. Yeah.
That was the last mathematical breakthrough, so to speak. So we haven't done jack. The only thing that's changed is the use cases, and there's enough computing horsepower to actually make AI work.
Yep.
I think that's where 2017 is interesting, because it did ramp. Things moved from pilot to production. And I think the other thing we're finding out in 2017 AI is if your data story isn't correct, like if your data isn't clean and you have poor data hygiene, your AI is going to suck too.
Yep.
The other thing in 2017, with the intersection of AI, is just that it just shows that we always have tech buyers, tech industry, tech everything. We always dream about that black box, that magic thing. We're just going to plug in and damn it, it's just going to fix all of our problems. And that's how AI is spoken about now. So, but real stuff's happening. So it's you couldn't cut it off the list for sure.
Well, from artificial intelligence to human intelligence, you can read our entire list of the top 7 trends that define technology in 2017 by visiting ZDNet. While you're there, make sure you keep a lookout for our 2018 technology preview video, and make sure to subscribe to the ZDNet Next Big Thing newsletter. For Larry Dignan and Jason Heiner in New York, I'm Dan Patterson.